Hello, my name is Jesan Sorrells, and this is the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast bonus with my co-host today, Matt Westgate. Hello, Matt.
Thanks, Hasan, for having me here. It's great to be here.
Great to have you. Now, typically on bonus episodes, we do fun things like we will talk with folks who are in AI research, or we'll talk with folks who are doing something interesting in a particular space that we really appreciate. But today, on this bonus episode, we are doing something we have not done since Click Clack Moo, Cows That Type. We're going to cover a kid's book today. And so this goes out to all you kids out there. If you're between the ages of 10 and 17, go ask your parents if you can listen to this episode, where we are going to be talking about the great book by Carlo Collodi, which I'm holding up in the visuals, which you can't see on the audio, so go check out the YouTube version of it. By the way, ask your parents before you go on YouTube. It is a dangerous place. Always ask your parents. We are going to be talking about Pinocchio today. So let me go ahead and get started for all you kids out there. This is from chapter 3, if you're following along in the book. Little as Geppetto's house was, it was neat and comfortable. It was a small room on the ground floor with a tiny window under the stairway. The furniture could not have been much simpler. A very old chair, a rickety old bed, and a tumble-down table. A fireplace full of burning logs was painted on the wall opposite the door. Over the fire there was painted a pot full of something which kept boiling happily away and sending up clouds of what looked like real steam. As soon as he reached home, Geppetto took his tools and began to cut and shape the wood into a marionette. "What shall I call him?" he said to himself. "I think I'll call him Pinocchio. This name will make his fortune. I knew a whole family of Pinocchi once. Pinocchi the father, Pinocchio the mother, Pinocchio the children, and they were all lucky. The richest of them begged for his living." After choosing a name for his marionette, Geppetto set seriously to work to make the hair, the forehead, the eyes. Fancy his surprise when he noticed that these eyes moved and then stared fixedly at him. Geppetto, seeing this, felt insulted and said in a grieved tone, "Ugly wooden eyes, why do you stare so?" There was no answer. After the eyes, Geppetto made the nose, which began to stretch as soon as finished. It stretched and stretched and stretched till it became so long it seemed endless. Poor Geppetto kept cutting it, but the more he cut, the longer grew that impertinent nose. In despair, he let it alone. Next, he made the mouth. No sooner was it finished than it began to laugh and poke fun at him. "Stop laughing," said Geppetto angrily, but he might as well have spoken to the wall. "Stop laughing, I say," he roared in a voice of thunder. The mouth stopped laughing, but it stuck out its long tongue. Not wishing to start an argument, Geppetto made believe he saw nothing and went on with his work. After the mouth, he made the chin, then the neck, the shoulders, the stomach, the arms, and the hands. As he was about to put the last touches on the fingertips, Geppetto felt his wig being pulled off. He glanced up, and what did he see? His yellow wig was in the marionette's hand. "Pinocchio, give me my wig!" But instead of giving it back, Pinocchio put it on his own head, which was half swallowed up in it. After that unexpected trick, Geppetto became very sad and downcast. More so than he had ever been before. "Pinocchio, you wicked boy," he cried out. "You are not yet finished, and you start out being impudent to your poor old father. Very bad, my son, very bad." And he wiped away a tear. And that was the creation of the puppet Pinocchio from the book, as we just mentioned, The Adventures of Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi, Collodi, written in 1883. The book was one of the most reimagined stories in children's literature. Matter of fact, if you're listening to this podcast right now, you've probably seen a version of Pinocchio. There's one that was released on Netflix about 2 or 3 years ago, and there's an upcoming live-action version of the Disney Pinocchio that we all traditionally know here and love in the United States, coming out in late 2022, starring Tom Hanks. And I've seen a couple of screenshots of that. You should go online and check that out. The story of Pinocchio was simple. He was carved by a woodcarver named Geppetto, as we just saw, in a Tuscan village. He was created as a wooden puppet, but he dreams of becoming a real boy. He is notably characterized by his frequent tendency to lie, which causes his nose to grow. Now, there's a lot of lessons for you boys and girls out there, for you young at heart, to learn from this book and from this story. And we've pulled a few excerpts from Pinocchio. Now, we're not going to read the whole book, even though it is short. There are short chapters. It's an easy breezy read, right? But we didn't pull everything from it. We just pulled a few things from the beginning, particularly in the penultimate moments before Pinocchio meets the blue fairy. And there's all kinds of fun things that happen after that. And we're going to explore them with our co-host today, Mr. Matt. So welcome, Matt. Thanks for coming on the podcast, and tell us a little bit about yourself, and let's get started off with some of our questions for our folks listening today.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you, Jesan. My background is primarily in education. I've worked in a variety of capacities as an elementary music educator, high school music educator. I've also got a fair amount of background now in church ministry, and that's also working with young people. So the current role that I get to enjoy is I am serving as what's called a spiritual life coordinator for a Christian school. So a lot of my job is teaching character development, is teaching decision making to young adults, middle and high school, and just kind of serving as a mentor in that way. I do teach some Bible classes, and I also have the privilege of serving as an adjunct professor of music at Boyce College in Louisville, Kentucky, and as a music minister at a local church. So probably most significantly, though, and I would be remiss to not say this, is the greatest accomplishment I've ever had is marrying my wife, Elizabeth. She is a treasure. She puts up with a lot. Please pray for her. We also have 5 children, so that keeps us very busy. But yeah, I think my whole life has been devoted to dealing with kids and working with that sort of field.
Well, and that's why we wanted to have you on the podcast, because with your extensive background and your impact with decision making and mentoring, you probably have a lot to say here about Pinocchio and potentially about some of his early choices, which are beginning to shape his path.
Yeah.
And maybe some advice for those of us who are listening, right, who want to know how we can make better choices and stay on the path of leadership, which is really the point of the adult version of this podcast, right? Mm-hmm. And if we could stay on the path and begin on the right path as kids, we'll wind up in a better place as adults.
Absolutely.
So let's get into the book a little bit. What are the differences between the story of Pinocchio, and what can our listeners learn from the story of Pinocchio that's not in the Disney version of this book?
Yeah, absolutely. As you and I were talking just a few minutes ago, the differences are numerous, but I find it interesting. You and I use the same term, sanitized, for the Disney version. Disney, I mean, and I can't fault them for this. They've got to sell, they've got to market. But I would say probably the biggest difference between these two entities, between Collodi's book and between the Disney version, is the intent and the purpose of it. Collodi's, he's teaching personal responsibility to young men in particular. I don't think young women were meant to be excluded, but traditionally speaking, young men tend to be far more at risk to act irresponsibly. And it seems like Collodi's got this mission in mind of trying to teach young men through a very, very practical and through, frankly, a very human way, through story. Collodi is an excellent storyteller, and he uses this and uses images, uses wonderful characters, uses very believable characters too, which is, I think, something that Disney does something different with. But I think Disney's intent with their movie in a lot of ways is what they have always done. It's going to be self-realization, self-actualization, trying to develop a better you through this thing. Pinocchio comes out in 1940. So, I mean, historically, you've got to look at a world at war. In 1940, you've got to look, the United States hasn't joined formally yet, but there's a lot of tension. And so how comforting is it to have a little cricket in this lovely tenor voice saying, "When you wish upon a star, your dreams come true." I mean, that is ideal. And so what you see here is Pinocchio in the movie. He makes some blunders, he makes some things, but it's often about him discovering who he truly is and trying to internalize values to get to this intrinsic identity. that he is faithful and true, and that's how he becomes a real boy. But what we often see in this is the real boy is the one who's held back by strings. He's the marionette of the perhaps the culture, whatever it may be. So Disney is always going to push towards that existentialism, towards that side of self-realized worth, that if you just discover who you are intrinsically, you have mastered something. You are the master of your fate, as Nelson Mandela once quoted. But Collodi's not interested in that. He's definitely more interested in, he's going to paint a very realistic human experience for you.
Yeah, the sense that I got from reading the book was Collodi wanted to make a moral statement about being a young person in society, and a moral statement about going to school, a moral statement about respecting your elders and respecting particularly your father, right? And the relationship between Pinocchio and Geppetto, his maker, right? Respecting society and culture. We see this in how Pinocchio engages with the rest of society and culture. And then, of course, how does Pinocchio, and this is the highest level, I think, and boys and girls, pay attention to this. This is one of those lessons that adults wish they wouldn't have to teach you, but it is one of the things that you have to learn, how to deal with malevolence and evil, right? How to deal with the people who genuinely do not have your best interests at heart. Right. And who are seeking to harm you and will use any manipulative tool they have available at their hands or their feet or their paws or their tails to harm you and to drive you off the path. Am I getting that?
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more.
Okay. When we look at this cricket, let's talk about the cricket, right? Because we've piqued folks' interests. The cricket, Jiminy Cricket in the movie. A little bit of a different iteration of the cricket here in Pinocchio by Carlo Collodi. So back to the book. But his, meaning Pinocchio's, happiness lasted only a short time, for just then he heard someone saying, "Gree, gree, gree." "Who is calling me?" asked Pinocchio, greatly frightened. "I am." Pinocchio turned and saw a large cricket crawling slowly up the wall. "Tell me, cricket, who are you?" "I am the talking cricket, and I have been living in this room for more than 100 years. Today, however, this room is mine," said the marionette. "And if you wish to do me a favor, get out now, and don't turn around even once." "I refuse to leave this spot," answered the cricket, "until I have told you a great truth." "Tell it then, and hurry." "Woe to boys who refuse to obey their parents and run away from home. They will never be happy in this world, and when they are older, they will be very sorry for it." "Sing on, cricket, mine as you please. What I know is that tomorrow at dawn I leave this place forever. If I stay here, the same thing will happen to me which happens to all other boys and girls. They are sent to school, and whether they want to or not, they must study. As for me, let me tell you, I hate to study. It is much more fun, I think, to chase after butterflies, climb trees, and steal birds' nests." "Poor little silly, don't you know that if you go on like that, you will grow into a perfect donkey, and that you'll be the laughingstock of everyone?" "Keep still, you old ugly cricket," cried Pinocchio. But the cricket, who was a wise old philosopher, instead of being offended at Pinocchio's impudence, continued in the same tone. "If you do not like going to school, why don't you at least learn a trade so you can earn an honest living?" "Shall I tell you something?" asked Pinocchio, who was beginning to lose patience. "Of all the trades in the world, there is only one that really suits me." "And what can that be?" "That of eating, drinking, sleeping, playing, and wandering around from morning till night." "Let me tell you for your own good, Pinocchio," said the talking cricket in his calm voice, those who follow that trade always end up in the hospital or prison." "Careful, ugly cricket. If you make me angry, you'll be sorry." "Poor Pinocchio, I am so sorry for you." "Why?" "Because you are a marionette, and what is much worse, you have a wooden head." At these last words, Pinocchio jumped up in a fury, took a hammer from the bench, and threw it with all his strength at the talking cricket. Perhaps he did not think he would strike it, but, sad to relate, my dear children, he did hit the cricket straight on its head. With a last weak gree, 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 the poor cricket fell from the wall, dead. Kids, this happens literally in the book, kids. When you're reading the book, again, those of us who are young or young at heart, when you are reading the book, this literally happens in chapter 3, right after he gets carved. Geppetto walks out. Pinocchio is there by himself, and all of a sudden there's this cricket that pops up, and Pinocchio totally blows him off and then throws a hammer at him, and the cricket expires. Now, at this point in the story, Pinocchio doesn't have much personality, Matt. He's just kind of floating around. He's trying to find his way. And we can see this in the conversation between him and the cricket, right? He's trying to find his way. He doesn't know what his way is. The cricket is recommending, go to school or learn a trade, become a useful member of society. You were talking about personal responsibility. And one of the ways that Disney takes this idea of Jiminy Cricket is they turn it into the conscience, and they say the infamous line, or have Jiminy Cricket say the infamous line, let your conscience be your guide, right? Let your conscience be your guide. Now, you're a person not only of faith, but you are a person who teaches in a faith-based organization and has worked in faith-based organizations and has a background in theology. I can't think of any worse theological advice than let your conscience be your guide. And by the way, theology just means ology, study of theo, God, right? The study of God. That's what Matt has done for a long time. He has studied God, right? Which, by the way, for those of you who are listening, is incredibly useful to understand the world. Okay.
Yep.
And weirdly enough, Pinocchio's conscience is outside of him, which Disney kept that too. So if I'm pretend I'm a young, impressionable young man. You talked about young men and personal responsibility. What am I to make from this passage? What am I to pull from this? What is the meaning of him killing his conscience, or the cricket?
Yeah, absolutely. So many things you could say here, but just because we need to keep this short. As you mentioned, I am a person of faith. I cannot read this book and not think of the book of Proverbs. First off, I'll just make this sweeping general statement. The book of Proverbs bleeds, frankly, into this book in spots. So what you see here, Collodi illustrates an important idea of conscience, almost like he's King Solomon writing Proverbs to his son, saying, and here are some of the things we just see from this. You see that the cricket's been in there for 100 years.
Right.
And I mean, so he predates Geppetto by who knows how long.
Exactly.
And then you have Pinocchio, who's been on the scene all of 10 minutes,
10 seconds.
20 minutes, So there's a proverb, Proverbs 22:28 in the Bible that says, do not move the ancient landmark. So I in some ways, what we're seeing here is this. The cricket is wise because the cricket is experienced. The cricket's been there for a minute, thousands, probably billions at this point. And he is trying to encourage this young man what it means to live in this world of which this young man has never once lived. And so what you see here is a young man wrestling with his conscience. And I think we can relate to this. So young person, do you have an inner dialogue in your head where you're going like, do I want to do this? Should I do this? Should I choose to go on this? Should I not? Listen, I mean, I know it's a cute little cricket and all, but we all have it. We all have it in our head. We're trying to internalize this. So I think the first wisdom I would encourage, especially for a young leader, is this. You need to have integrity. And you need to have people pour into you for integrity. So, and I think one of the strengths of this book, though not in this question, you've already referenced this, there are adults that don't have your best interest at heart, that don't actually have integrity. And I would plead with you to be very wise about where you source out your integrity. Being a person of faith, I've got views on that, and my goodness, you can email me and I'll talk to you about it.
There
But I would just say this. First off, you listen to wisdom and you listen to conscience. Pinocchio, though, does what is also very normal, rejecting wisdom. And so here's maybe just a piece of caution for you. You can sear your conscience.
Mm-hmm.
You can choose to say, nope, I'm not going to follow that in this situation. Or, you know what? I want to go chase some butterflies today. How many business people do you know that chase butterflies? I mean,
all day.
Yeah.
in my adult life, all day.
Exactly. And I mean, truthfully, Jesan, I mean, your business, what you do in serving young professionals and professionals in business, a lot of times it's helping people identify the butterflies that they're chasing and helping them source out what they can do. So realize this, you can sear your conscience, but it comes with a price. And it's not just a cute little cricket dying.
That's right.
It's going to source into what we see coming later in the book, where he's continuing to make decisions, and yet he keeps getting overridden by his impulse, and he keeps getting overridden by foolishness. So that's something that I would say. And just a final thought, I will never forget this. A couple of years ago, I took a trip. I was in Malaysia, of all places, but it was just a wonderful trip. I was singing with a cappella group, and I was working on an assignment for my master's degree, and one of my professors was with us. And he asked me what I was working on. It was for his class. And I said, well, I took this one, man, Dr. Lewis, this is really hard. And he looked at me straight in the face and he said, Matt, why do easy? Why do easy? And I thought for a minute, I said, I'm not sure. I think I know what you mean. He goes, no, listen. He goes, what value is there in following ease? He said, you're built in character and integrity by doing something difficult. So he said, can I encourage you? I'm glad that you picked this piece and don't give up on it. So I would just tell a young person this: you need to value integrity over ease. You need to value the difficult things, the things that we eventually see Pinocchio do. So that would be my encouragement from this.
That's great encouragement. I have nothing to add to that. Back to the book. So now Pinocchio is wandering around. He's going forth in the world. A couple of chapters later, I think it's chapter 6, that we pick him up, and he goes and visits a Harlequin show, a puppet show, in essence. If any of you folks out there have ever seen a Punch and Judy show, this is kind of what he's visiting, right? Two puppets arguing about nonsensical things. Typically a form of entertainment in the world before TikTok videos and nonsense on social media. Before that was the puppet show that entertained everybody. And so Pinocchio's rolling up to this puppet show after selling his book for a couple of pennies, right? Which Geppetto bought him his primer, his book, so that he could go to school and fill his head with knowledge, right? But Pinocchio proves he still has a wooden head, and now he has a wooden head with no conscience. Back to the book. Pinocchio, come up to me, shouted Harlequin. That's one of the puppets. Come to the arms of your wooden brothers. At such a loving invitation, Pinocchio, with one leap from the back of the orchestra, found himself in the front rows. With another leap, he was on the orchestra leader's head. With a third, he landed on the stage. It is impossible to describe the shrieks of joy, the warm embraces, the knocks, and the friendly greetings with which that strange company of dramatic actors and actresses received Pinocchio. It was a heart-rending spectacle, but the audience, seeing that the play had stopped, became angry and began to yell, "The play! The play! We want the play!" The yelling was of no use, for the marionettes, instead of going on with their act, made twice as much racket as before, and lifting up Pinocchio on their shoulders, carried him around the stage in triumph. At that very moment, the director came out of his room. He had such a fearful appearance that one look at him would fill you with horror. His beard was as black as pitch, and so long that it reached from his chin down to his feet. His mouth was as wide as an oven, his teeth like yellow fangs, and his eyes two glowing red coals. In his huge, hairy hands, a long whip made of green snakes and black cats' tails twisted together, swished through the air in a dangerous way. At the unexpected apparition, no one dared even to breathe. One could almost hear a fly go by. Those poor marionettes, one and all, trembled like leaves in a storm. So this is not good. Interesting thing here. I'm going to kind of jog off a little bit. You mentioned the Proverbs of Solomon and integrity, and this is an example of Pinocchio clearly starting to act without integrity, but then being celebrated as part of a spectacle in the crowd, as he continues to act without integrity, right? And it's not the crowd that turns against him; it's the other performers, the other actors, the other audience members. Or not, I'm sorry, not the other audience members, the other actors who kind of help him and engage him right in this process. One of the challenges, I believe, fundamentally for people, I would say between the ages of 10 and 17 in our world today, is this idea of having an audience, this idea of always being on social media, and in other forms of being on, and creating environments inside of their devices, which we didn't have when we were kids. But creating these environments inside of these devices that their parents don't necessarily have access to, but that they do. And then it very often, they're wandering around in these places and putting on a show for these audiences and being brought up from the back to the front, leaping over the crowd, right? Leaping over as you mentioned, the hard work, right? Leaping over the hard work and taking advantage of the ease, right? Now, there's a number of different parallels here. And of course, there's an idea core in here when the director comes out that at the end of all that leaping, you're going to wind up seeing malevolence. You're going to wind up seeing the face of, if not necessarily evil, at the very minimum, someone who doesn't have your best interest at heart. What we call online a bad actor, right? How do kids deal with this? Particularly from adults, particularly in spaces where they may not be safe, right? And this is why we said, ask your parents' permission before watching this. Ask your parents' permission before listening to this. Listen to it with your parents, right? And talk about the episode, right? Talk about Pinocchio. Talk about what's in the book. How can kids address this lack of just and right behavior, both from people who are encouraging them, who are their peers, like the Harlequin was Pinocchio's peer, and from people who have malevolence, maybe in their heart? How do they thread this needle, if they've got an iPhone?
Yeah.
I'm sure you've run into a lot of this in your mentoring.
Oh my goodness. Yes. It's a very needed topic, and so much could be devoted to it, but I would say several things. But first off, I'm going to go back to what I said earlier. Young person, you need integrity. You need to have a basis really for truth to stake your life on for this. What you see with Pinocchio is a young man who lives without truth and lives with no stability, no foundation, no structure in his life. And now I need to be fair, because there are kids who have not had that. Not every kid's rejected that. That would be an unfair generalization. But every kid, I believe, can develop a sense of character and a sense of strength. Admittedly, for some, it's going to be very hard, because that will run countercultural to their home life. It may run countercultural to their friend groups. But this is that important that I would still encourage that person to do this. So how do you address a lack of justice with your peers? Well, first off, you need to be among your peers, and you should be engaging with your peers in some extent. As a person who, as you said, growing up without a device, like, it was a big deal when I got my first laptop, to consider the fact that my smartphone has way more power than that laptop could have ever dreamed of having. There's a tendency in my age group and above to start dumping on technology and viewing it as this, massive problem. Yeah, any kind of innovation is going to bring some challenges and some ethical dilemmas. But there are things we can leverage this stuff for good. And so I would encourage any young person, first off, to just use it in a different way. So if you use TikTok, for example, I would not use it with zero accountability. I would encourage young people to have accountability from both peers and especially from adults. The peers are optional in my mind. The adults are not. You need someone, because here's the thing. Teenagers, and I say we because I was there at one point myself, and I still struggle with this. This is why I'm so passionate about it. I can still be really stupid as an adult. Yeah. The one thing my past teens have taught me is there are people I can go ask to help me with stupid. And that's what really needs to be in place. So I would say, engage with your peers. And how do you do this with peers and adults? You have your sense of integrity, but I think you still need to show a great deal of respect and humility in your interactions with them. Nobody likes being attacked. Nobody likes being confronted publicly. Nobody likes doing this. We need to realize this. We all fail. Adults, the best adults will fail. And you even see this. Geppetto is not a perfect adult. He gets into a fight with a guy in the beginning of the book.
Yeah, he's terrible. Geppetto's absolutely terrible. Warning, like literally chapter 2. He's like yelling at somebody because he called him something polenta or polina or something like that. Yeah,
made fun of his wig. I mean, but here's the thing: as an adult, I get caught up in dumb stuff like that sometimes. I mean, go no further than ask my wife Elizabeth. I've started arguments over the dumbest stuff. So, young person, if you see an adult fail, recognize this: you have just as much capacity to fail as they do. That you just happen to witness a moment of it. So be respectful and be calm. I would encourage you to approach them, but be very thoughtful how you do it. Consider doing more one-on-one conversation if it's appropriate, and if you can do that, or maybe another person nearby. And I would encourage you, instead of accusing, to ask questions and to seek further understanding from people on something. So if, for instance, and I've done this as a teacher, the way I said something to a student, what I said wasn't wrong, but the tone and the way that I said something, it hurt that student's feelings. And it was in a public setting. And I noticed the students' interactions with me change. So actually, as I talked with her later, to her credit, she said, yeah, this, I realized that's not what you meant. And I realized that, but it did come across that way. If you have a leader who can recognize their faults, and an adult who can recognize their faults and can apologize to you and seek to reconcile things with you, you have a great leader. You need to listen to that person. You need to trust that person. If you have a person who gets incredibly defensive and who decides to use means of manipulation or downplaying or gaslighting, if you will, I know that's probably not a term a lot of young people use, but using those things, then I would start distancing myself a little bit from their wisdom and from their counsel. But I would just, in closing, say this. Not only is it possible that you will see a lack of justice, you will almost inevitably see a lack of justice. And you know what? It's good and right for you to address that in the right way.
Well, and a lack of justice coming from a lack of judgment. A lack of compassion, which we see this with the director in the subsequent events that occur in the chapter from which we pulled the excerpt, where Pinocchio, in essence, has to come to a moral conclusion about how to save his peers from the justice of the director. And, he leverages that in order to battle malevolence, leveraging tears, leveraging appeals to humanity. And the director turns out to be just as morally bankrupt as you would think. And Collodi the author does not sugarcoat this at all. He shows it such as it were. And again, this book was written in 1883. So I want to be very clear on that. That's what, 130 years ago? And so a lot of things have changed in 130 years, but a lot of things have not. And one of the things that has not is one of the things that Matt's talking about here. Compassion, mercy, judgment. Those are human traits that,
That's right.
Even if you're a kid, in a particular situation, or, young person or teenager, or however you want to frame it, whatever word you want to use, in a situation where you are trying to be drawn in by your peers, you do have to use judgment, and you do have to be on the lookout for those malevolent entities. And like you were saying, I love how you said that: back away, distance yourself, get out of those situations.
Yep, absolutely.
Well, so Pinocchio doesn't stop there, right? So he's he's moving along down the road, and he goes through this entire sequence where he winds up getting some gold coins. And I won't tell you how he gets some gold coins. One of the things I always encourage people to do is, and I'm going to hold up the book again, grab the book. Okay. The complete and unabridged version is only $8. It's the best $8 you're going to get. I'm holding up the Puffin Classics version of it right now, as you can see, if you're watching the video. So go get the Puffin Classics version of Pinocchio. Go get that original version, and then watch the movie too. I would encourage you to go get the original version and watch the Disney film, the original one from the 1940s, and kind of see what has changed, right? And of course, what is the same. So Pinocchio gets these gold coins, and he's walking down the road with these gold coins, and he meets a couple of characters as he's walking down the road. Attempting to return to Geppetto, by the way. He's not attempting to kind of jump out or go do something weird. He's attempting to go back home. And this is one of the other ideas in Pinocchio, that it is an epic journey, right? And if you're a young person, your life is an epic journey, just like Pinocchio's. So back to the book. And he pulled out the gold pieces which the fire eater had given him. At the cheerful tinkle of the gold, the fox... Pay attention, folks. The fox unconsciously held out his paw that was supposed to be lame, and the cat opened wide his two eyes till they looked like live coals, but he closed them again so quickly that Pinocchio did not notice. And may I ask, inquired the fox, what are you going to do with all that money? First of all, answered the marionette, I want to buy a fine new coat for my father, a coat of gold and silver with diamond buttons. After that, I'll buy an ABC book for myself. For yourself? For myself, I want to go to school and study hard. Look at me, said the fox. For the silly reason of wanting to study, I have lost a paw. Look at me, said the cat. For the same foolish reason, I have lost the sight of both eyes. At that moment, a blackbird, perched on the fence along the road, called out sharp and clear, Pinocchio, do not listen to bad advice. If you do, you'll be sorry. Poor little blackbird, if he'd only kept his words to himself. In the twinkling of an eyelid, the cat leaped on him and ate him, feathers and all. After eating the bird, he cleaned his whiskers, closed his eyes, and became blind once more. Poor blackbird, said Pinocchio to the cat. Why did you kill him? I killed him to teach him a lesson. He talks too much. Next time he will keep his words to himself. By this time, the three companions had walked a long distance. Suddenly, the fox stopped in his tracks and turned to the marionette and said to him, Do you want to double your gold pieces? What do you mean? Do you want 100, 1,000, 2,000 gold pieces for your miserable 5? Yes, but how? The way is very easy. Instead of returning home, come with us. And where will you take me? To the city of Simple Simons. The way is very easy. I shouldn't laugh, but as an adult as an adult looking back on this, I'm like, what are we doing? If I were 10 or 11 or 12, I think back to how I was when I was 10, 11, 12 years old reading this book. I probably, obviously, I wouldn't have gotten the illusions at the time, or I might have gotten the surface of the illusions. But underneath, I'm the guy who's reading The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway at like 8 and trying to figure out the illusions in that book, right? So I would have gotten the illusions, but the the meat of the emotions underneath the way is easy of that statement, like that struck me so hard as a 40-year-old adult now, right? Looking back, shenanigans, right? The way is easy on the road to what was it? The city of Simple Simons. The road is easy on the way to the city of Simple Simons, right? The shenanigans are many. Couple of things here with Pinocchio that just strike me right off the bat, and then we can talk a little bit about this. But he is totally and utterly blind to the shenanigans of the cat and fox. And the question he asks is not, how did you see to kill him? Which seems to be the obvious question because you're pretending to be blind. Nope. That wasn't the obvious question, though, for Pinocchio. For Pinocchio, the question was, why did you just kill him? Like, why did you eat him? And then he's not like, hey, you know what? As I tell my kids sometimes, you're a bunch of shady gangsters. I'm going to leave. I don't feel compelled to hang around you anymore. No. He walks a long distance with the fox and the cat. And then it is only as he's walking a long distance that the fox schemes up this plan to rob Pinocchio, basically, of his 5 gold pieces. After, of course, having a sumptuous meal that Pinocchio will pay for. There's a core lesson in here, not just for kids, but also for adults. You always pay the piper. My father told me this many years ago, and it was absolutely the truth. You always pay the piper. You either pay now or you pay later, but you're going to pay. And the villains and the scoundrels always demand payment, and they demand it up front, as does the world. They demand payment up front. From the IRS all the way to, the consequences of bad behavior, payment is always demanded up front. What can children take from this little passage here with the fox and the cat? And then how can they weave this into their own leadership epic?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, several things, as you said, be wise, be observant. You need to observe not just what they say, but what is done. Mm-hmm. As you so wisely pointed out here. Interestingly enough, I think one of the big things I would say, aside from ease, is, do you notice how the fox compares the 100, 2,000 this to your miserable 5? We got to foster some discontentment in your life. And I mean, in one sense, I could be really jaded and say, well, that's just marketing 101. But I mean, I think there's an important lesson in here of contentment is a big deal. Mm-hmm. You've got to be able to understand that there are times where you say, I've got enough.
Didn't St. Paul say something about that in Corinthians?
Yeah, for sure. I've learned in all things to be content. Yes. And so that is something that I would say. And I would say for a young person, particularly a young person in business, very practically speaking, don't be into get rich quick. Mm-hmm. Don't be into trying to make fast money. Most of the time, the only person making fast money is the person you're paying.
There you go.
So you just need to be mindful of that. This is something that you should know, that money and work are together. They are married together, and there's a goodness, there's a dignity in that you should preserve. And then I would just say, as far as molding a leadership epic story, I so appreciate that you've brought that up. And I think one of the things, as I was struck rereading Pinocchio again, is that how that story really does feel like my life. Every day feels like this detailed shenanigan that just runs from one place to another. And I might be one day burying money in a field thinking it's going to grow, to the next day playing with the donkeys, if you will. And whatever it is, I appreciate this because life doesn't look like this one track of something. It looks like a series of vignettes. It looks like a series of scenarios. And young person or young at heart person, I would just say this: molding your own leadership story is being faithful to follow principles in each scenario that you find.
There you go.
Just be faithful to that.
Yes. Ease, avoid ease and search for resiliency. Engage with compassion and clear thinking and wisdom. And then, of course, avoid discontentment. Be happy with and content with what you have. And, in the space of that leadership epic piece, don't believe the highlight reels you see from other people.
Yeah. Ooh, yeah. Oh, guilty of that one.
I think we all are. I think that is excellent counsel for all of us. We only get to see people's highlight reels, that they put out. No one's putting out the bad stuff. They're just putting out the good stuff. And so don't be impressed too much by that. Yeah. All right, we're turning the corner. Oh, go ahead. You had one other thought here before we turn the corner?
Nope, not at all. Go ahead.
Okay. Okay. So, I mean, and by the way, I loved how you mentioned, learning and using and leveraging language. One of the things with a literature-based podcast, and our Big Boy podcast, for those of you who don't listen, we really cover heavy books. Like we talk about, 100 Years of Solitude, or we talk about the Iliad, or we talk about, the Gulag Archipelago. This month we have talked about comics, right? But not necessarily always comic books and graphic novels for kids, right? Because there's some very heavy adult things going on, right? Adult themes, being explored in certain types of comic-based and image-based literature, right? But we do look at heavy books. We do look at big concepts, right? That have geopolitical and political and epic potential, right, in your life, right? But on these bonus episodes, we do look at things that are lighter. We do look at things that are less, maybe seem on the surface to be less weighty. But as we're talking about today with Matt, can definitely have way more of an impact because they seem as though they are just kids' stuff.
Right. It's good.
So yeah, back to the book. Let's turn the corner here. Let's see what Pinocchio does with his gold pieces and where he winds up after he pays for a sumptuous supper that he barely ate any of. Pinocchio paid a gold piece for the 3 suppers and started on his way toward the field that was to make him a rich man. He walked on, not knowing where he was going, for it was dark, so dark that not a thing was visible. Round about him not a leaf stirred. A few bats skimmed his nose now and again and scared him half to death. Once or twice he shouted, "Who goes there?" And the faraway hills echoed back to him, "Who goes there? Who goes there? Who goes?" As he walked, Pinocchio noticed a tiny insect glimmering on the tree of a trunk, a small being that glowed with a pale, soft light. "Who are you?" he asked. "I am the ghost of the talking cricket," answered the little being in a faint voice that sounded as if it came from a faraway world. "What do you want?" asked the marionette. "I want to give you a few words of good advice. Return home and give the 4 gold pieces you have left to your poor father who is weeping because he has not seen you for many a day. Tomorrow my father will be a rich man, for these 4 gold pieces will become 2,000. Don't listen to those who promise you wealth overnight, boy. As a rule, they are either fools or swindlers. Listen to me and go home. But I want to go on. The hour is late. I want to go on. The night is very dark. I want to go on. The road is dangerous. I want to go on. Remember that boys who insist on having their own way sooner or later come to grief.
Yeah.
The same nonsense. Goodbye, cricket. Good night, Pinocchio, and may heaven preserve you from the assassins. There was silence for a minute, and the light of the talking cricket disappeared suddenly, just as if someone had snuffed it out. Once again, the road was plunged in darkness. A lot of allegory here. That's a big word, meaning meaning narrative and words and language being used to represent and to intimate or to point to other ideas. That's a big word there. Go look up that word. If you don't know what the word allegory means, go look up that word. You'll see a bunch of different definitions of it and examples of it. But it is language being used to point to other experiences because it is universal language. This idea of the hour being late, the road being dark, the road being dangerous. When I read this passage, I thought immediately of Lord of the Rings.
Hmm.
When Frodo goes out on the journey, and Galadriel gives him the light of I can't remember what it is right now, but she tells him, particularly in the movie, this will be your light when all the other lights go out. And the reference there from both Tolkien and from Collodi is a Christian one. It is not a secular one. This idea that the Holy Spirit, the light of the world, such as it is, came into darkness. It's no accident that Jesus' birth is celebrated at the end of the year. That's no accident. That wasn't just to appeal to the pagans, although it may have had a secular reason for that inside of it. We can't dismiss that. But that wasn't the whole thing. The whole thing is this allegorical idea being played out in the world that there is light in darkness. And it's only valuable if you listen to it and don't argue with it.
Yep.
How does a young person or a young at heart person, as we've said today, we've used both of those terms because this is good for both of them.
Yeah.
How do you not argue with the light? I argue with the light. I'm sure you argue with the light. If you're 10, how are you not arguing with the light? How are you not arguing with that voice inside of you? How do you how do you get off of the road that's dangerous and dark where the hour is late?
Yeah. First off, I would say this, and I can go back to the other excerpt that you just read. One of the big needs that we need to realize here is wisdom oftentimes doesn't look all that impressive. And I think Collodi does a wonderful job of explaining and impersonating that through his choice of a cricket and a blackbird. The enemies were, so to speak, the enemies, the true enemies here, the fox and the cat, those are predatory animals. They look impressive, and in fact, the blackbird gives wisdom and is immediately squelched for it. Just realize this: your perception on this may very well be off. So don't trust that. Don't trust that. Instead, look at how listen to the content and listen to what is being said there. What we hear here is a cricket giving wisdom for, listen, you have enough. Go home. Go home. Young person, I would encourage you. I just frankly just had to apologize and reconcile with my wife over this very thing yesterday. Is this: do not neglect your family for industry. Do not neglect your family for industry. You see, the advice is go home. Your father misses you. There's a desire for relationship here. I'm not telling you don't be industrious. Oh, be industrious, but do not leave your family in the dust to be industrious. You will lose all that is good and have a pile of money and be miserable. And so I would say that's one little piece here for this. How do you keep listening to it? First off, you just have to try it one time. And I promise you this: the more you do it, the more you become sensitive to it, and the more you can perceive it. That would be my practical encouragement to that.
Awesome. In thinking about Pinocchio, right? We want to leave him here because this is a short podcast today, short episode today. And I want to thank Matt for coming on and talking with us from his vast experience, his knowledge, his wisdom, and sharing that with us and with the young and the young at heart who are listening out there today. All of us can take something from the things that Matt has said today, apply it to Pinocchio, and then go walk it out in our real lives. So I want to thank Matt for coming on today. And I want to make a point here about staying on the path, because typically on the adult version of this podcast, I wrap up, right? I have a wrap up statement, a conclusion, right, for folks who are listening. And I want to give you a conclusion today if you are listening. If you are between the ages of 10 and 17, or if you have a heart that is between the ages of 10 and 17, trapped in a body that might be significantly older than that, Matt's brought up several things today that I want to support and I want to reiterate because, yes, the path can grow dark and the road is dangerous. This is the point of going on an epic journey.
Mm.
Just like I mentioned with Lord of the Rings, right? When Frodo leaves his door or Bilbo goes out his door, you never know what you're going to encounter along the path. And on these podcasts, we do explore what books look like because they are paper leaders, but they are also paper guides to guide us along the path, to understand, to be a light when all other lights may potentially be out. This is why reading matters. This is why books matter. So don't neglect that in your life. The areas that will keep you on the path are resiliency and wisdom, contentment, being able to discern good from evil, and of course, what Matt closed out with, which I absolutely agree with, not sacrificing relationships for material gain. Relationships matter. Because look, at the end of the day, on a long enough timeline, everybody winds up in the same clearing at the end of multiple different paths. The people that you want to be there, mourning your end or just helping you along to that clearing at the end of the path, are going to be there based on relationship that they have built with you over the course of time.
That's right.
So hug your mom and hug your dad. Even if your siblings are giving you noogies or perhaps giving you swirlies in the toilet, although I don't know if people still do that anymore. They did when I was a kid. I don't know what you all do. I had a rough childhood with my siblings sometimes. But, those relationships matter. And so preserve those, right? Hug your mom, hug your dad, give your sibling a high five if you don't want to hug him or her. And make sure that your friends are picked well and are chosen well. That way you can stay on this path. You can build a leadership story that will be epic, and an epic story that will feature you leading others and leading them well. And, that's it for me. Matt, do you have anything for folks today? Any ways they can connect with you? Anything you'd like to promote for the podcast? Anything you'd like people to reach out to you about? I know you mentioned an email address there. I don't know if you want us to publicize that and float that around. But how can people get in contact with you? What's the best way to kind of get a hold of Matt and ask him some interesting and compelling questions?
Absolutely. I am okay with, there's an email address I use for this. So if you are interested, you can reach out to me at mwestgate. That's my first initial last name at CA, which stands for Christian Academy, schools.us. You can reach out to me there if you have any questions, even if you just need to bounce something off of me. A lot of times that's what I'm looking for is like, hey, I'm going through this. What do you think? What am I seeing here? What do I need to work through? My social media game needs to up itself a bit, but I do have Facebook. You can look me up there. I'll be the bald guy. And you can connect with me there as well.
Awesome. So we will have that email address. Just trying to think of the word there. We will have that email address in the show notes, so you can get a hold of Matt. You'll be able to click on that, and hopefully it'll open up in your email server of choice, or your mom or dad's email server of choice. And of course, when you email Matt with a question, please reference the Leadership Lessons from the Great Books podcast Pinocchio episode as our bonus that you heard him on today. We'll also have a Facebook link in there in case you want to connect with him. Please be respectful, obviously, and please connect with him for legitimate purposes, and to get your questions answered, and just to start a conversation and maybe potentially begin to build a mentoring relationship with Matt. For us on our end, look. We've been beta testing a new product for kids. We've been beta testing a new experience for kids this spring, this late winter and into spring. It's called the Kids Leadership Institute. Look, one of the ways we were challenged last year, I was challenged last year by the people that I work with and my partners, was to really think about critically, how can we go further downstream? So for all of you who are listening, adulthood is, for some of you, maybe way up in the distance, right? Or maybe a little bit closer. Very rarely are you provided an opportunity to be able to engage in real, meaningful leadership interaction and real, meaningful leadership growth, unless maybe you're involved in a sport or a club or an on-campus organization. So what do? You get all this advice from parents, from your siblings, from your friends about what you should do and how you should be. And just like Pinocchio, you may be struggling with how to stay on the path. Our Kids Leadership Institute, which is adapted from our Leadership Toolbox for Adults, features 12 different lessons covering 12 different areas that will give you advice, give you interactive activities, and we're even talking about developing an app, and give you content, right, where you can work with your parents, you can work with fellow siblings, and you can work with your cohort to help you figure out how to take all that leadership knowledge that you've never actually been able to act on or maybe even consciously think about, bring it to the surface and engage with it in the world. Look, if you're 10, you need to know how to negotiate. If you're 11, you need to know how to adapt to change. If you're 14 or 15, you need to figure out what are the next steps. Where am I going to go? What's it going to look like? How am I going to get through this high school thing, much less this college thing? If you're 13 or 17, you're in developmental bookmarks, right? Where you're ending one period of your life and beginning another. Our Kids Leadership Institute is designed specifically for students and families of students who are between the ages of 4 and 17, and we're beta testing this product right now with a small cohort of folks. If you'd like to be interested in future, you'd like to be considered for future betas or be contacted for future testing, or just, get updates about where we're going with the curriculum, the facilitation, and the interactivity, you can, of course, email me, CEO@hsconsultingandtraining.com, and reference Kids Leadership Institute. This bonus podcast and the other bonus podcasts we'll be doing over the course of the year, covering such books as Lord of the Rings, and The Wizard of Oz, we're going to talk about that one too, act as audio training that walks alongside the Kids Leadership Institute and is a nice little add-on in content for something for you to listen to. So go check us out, leadershiptoolbox.us, and click on the link that says lessons there, and you can catch all of our podcasts, and stay tuned here for more about the Kids Leadership Institute. Once again, thanks, Matt, for coming on. I really do appreciate it, and go have a good rest of your leadership day. I'm out.